This is Inside the FLX from FingerLakes1.com. I'm Ted Baker. We were unable to do our usual Tuesday edition this week, so it's Thursday morning live, and we welcome into our Seneca Falls studios Bill Roege with the Seneca Lake Pure Waters Association at senecalake.org. Welcome, Bill.
Thank you. It's good to be here.
So let's talk a little bit about the history of the organization. It's been around over 30 years now. It began with people who cared about the future of Seneca Lake, and over time it's grown into people doing something about it with a lot of the programs that we're going to talk about today.
Yep. So it's was kind of stable for a while, and then really in the last 5 years, we've really started to grow. So, and part of that is programs like we're going to talk about today is the andHAB program. We do stream monitoring, so that started us into more of the citizen science and monitoring the lake to know something about it. And now we've added a number of other programs over the last few years, a couple even in the last year. So we're definitely growing as the things we do, as well as now growing more membership and revenues, et cetera.
And we're going to talk today about membership and citizen science, how you can volunteer to help. Early on, you partnered with people like the Finger Lakes Institute at Hobart and William Smith. Do you still work with do you work with organizations like SWIO, that's the organization that Mark Venuti chairs, the Geneva supervisor, Seneca Lake Guardian? Do you all try to sort of keep in touch and share notes?
Absolutely. So SWIO particularly is, we're very, very close to them. We still work very closely with the Finger Lakes Institute and others around the area. It depends. Each of them has a certain role. And so the partnership kind of focuses on where it is we have that common ground. And that's where we'll do something very close. So for instance, SWIO, we work very closely with the new watershed management plan that's just getting ready to be published. So that will point us to a lot of projects and activities that we will definitely be partnering with them on. Finger Lakes Institute, we just started a new program this year to study the fishery in Seneca Lake. Some of our members were complaining, geez, you know, where have all the fish gone? So now we're going to research into it and actually find out if we can. And Finger Lakes Institute is doing a 3-year research study with us to try to help inform that. And I think even this fall, we'll be getting some interesting data on that.
When and how did you get involved?
Well, I moved here in full-time in late 2016. So 2017, a neighbor suggested that I join up, and the andHABs program was just really ramping up, so that they needed volunteers to look at the zones. Before that wasn't the case. So I got involved there. I really enjoy research and science, and so I got involved in, since I was retired, I thought I had some time. No, I'm not so sure. But I got involved in managing the program, and so that's led to me leading the program now for, I guess this is the 4th year, among other things that I do for the organization.
So let's talk about some good news for Seneca Lake and Cuca Lake. You mentioned it, the 9-element plan has been approved, sent to the state for their final approval.
Right.
And when that happens, that opens up grant funding and a lot more opportunities to do things for the lake.
Yeah,
and I said the lakes, since the two are connected.
Yeah, in my mind, I think people on Seneca view Cuca as part of us. Cuca maybe not so much. But what it'll do is it helps show in a scientific way where the priorities are. So that, one, leads us to try to find projects and work in the high payoff areas. And since you're doing that, you're more likely to use that information then in your grant requests and hopefully compete better for grants. So we're hoping in the next 2 to 3 years, you know, we can see some significant progress in those areas.
The other piece of good news, so far it's early, but no harmful algal blooms, andHABs, on Seneca Lake yet. I know Cayuga Lake just reported some the other day. we've had a few years of data now. Are we starting to get an idea of the conditions under which they thrive? I would think that a drier year like this means less runoff going into the lake and maybe less chance of having a real heavy HAB season.
It's complicated. So it's possible that that's true, but most of the nutrients actually come in during the winter and the snow melt. So now the big storms do cause that, but overall in the lake, it's so big that it's fairly stable, so it doesn't see these spike. Now you do see near the shorelines, there's a lot of sediment, and sediment is what holds a lot of the nutrients there, particularly the phosphorus. But that's deposited, and we're not sure what triggers it. So there's, and last year was really interesting to try to show this, but it seems that the nitrogen and phosphorus cause the population to grow, but just because you have a large population doesn't mean you're going to get a bloom. There's something else that triggers the blooms. So for instance, last October 6th, we hadn't had very many blooms, and the water's getting colder, so the population shouldn't really be increasing that much. And for some reason that day, the whole lake exploded. We had 30 different reports all across the lake. The interesting thing is Canandaigua had the same thing, Cayuga had the same thing. So how do they all know to bloom exactly the same time? And there was nothing extraordinary about the day. So there's triggers that are really not understood, but the overall population growth is pretty well understood. And again, the lake is fairly stable. The HABs, there's been some good research that they're related or highly correlated to the zebra and quagga mussels. So they do two things. One, they clarify the water, and it's because they're feeding on the single cell green algae, and they don't like the blue-green toxic algae, and so that gives a competitive advantage to the blue-green algae to grow. And so the life cycle in the lake is early on, June and July, where we are now. You've probably seen a lot of this cladophora, really thick, massive macroalgae. That dominates early on, and it locks up a lot of those nutrients. Once that starts dying off, which is what it's doing now, those nutrients are released back into the water and now available, and we'll see the cyanobacteria population grow. Seneca Lake typically doesn't see blooms until mid-August, and then they're fairly sporadic, and usually September is the primary season. Cayuga, it's very typical. Every year they've had July blooms, whereas we've never seen any.
How do we tell the difference? You mentioned that ordinary sort of green slime that we see sometime, and sometimes people think those are HABs,
Yeah.
but they're not. So how do we tell the difference?
Well, one of the easiest way, although I don't recommend putting your hand in there, but you can take a stick, and if it sticks to the stick and it's got strings to it and it's got mass, then that's not cyanobacteria.
Right.
Cyanobacteria are very microscopic creatures. You really don't see them cellular-wise until you get to 200 to 300 magnification. And it's also a three-dimensional type of thing, so you'll see it go down into the water, or it comes up on the shore and it'll stay together, whereas the HABs are just right at the surface.
I've talked to you and other people from Seneca Lake Pure Waters and other people involved in the lake for years. Why do these things happen? And the answer is still, we don't know. Is there going to be an aha moment at some point? You've got this collection of data coming in. Maybe at some point a pattern reveals itself and we say, there it is, now we know what's causing it.
I think as far as knowing what triggers it, I think eventually we'll get there. There's so much study going on around the world. We think of it as bad, but there's other places that have this almost all the time. So we're actually not as bad as quite a few other places. But a lot of people in New York and all over the world, again, are studying these mechanisms, and it may be that there's a number of different reasons, and depending on your particular ecology in the lake, that's the reason that yours goes. Whereas in another lake, it may be a completely different mechanism going on. Even between Canandaigua, Seneca, and Cayuga, the lakes are all different. Their ecology is different. Cayuga has some invasive plant life that we don't have, yet, and hopefully never. And we're worried. Cayuga actually has some invasives that we're worried about coming down the outlet that are particularly aggressive in doing things.
Does water depth make any difference? For example, the northern end of Cayuga Lake is relatively shallow.
Yeah, probably because of the temperature. It's going to be much warmer, heat up much quicker, and so the populations go through their cycle probably quicker.
You mentioned earlier runoff coming into the lakes, and one of the things you do is stream monitoring, and we're going to talk about that coming up in volunteer opportunities. What is the sediment or runoff that's harmful, and where does it come from? I know you have several years of data there.
Yeah, so certainly in Seneca we have a high percentage of agricultural land that's in use, and so that is a big aspect of the sediment. What the 9E plan kind of tells us, which is actually well known, it's along with climate change and the big storms that come in, big quick snow melts and that sort of thing, any land that's not, got good plant life on it and the soil is free to move, then that's going to come down. And when the storms are bigger and the snow melts are faster, the water moves faster down the hill, and that carries the sediment even quicker. So part of our challenge is to slow down the water, and there's a lot of different ways of doing that, but that's really the key to keeping the nutrients on the land and not having them get into the water.
I know one of the ways that's being done, I've talked to Ian Smith, the watershed steward, about this Crooked Lake Canal project between Seneca and Cayuga Lakes. They're taking the former canal, which was used for commercial purposes, and repurposing it as, like you said, a place where that water can go
and settle,
and sit rather than running into the lake.
Yeah, so it's kind of reconnecting the floodplain back to the more original state. So that's we participate in that project also, and we're real hopeful that'll help. It's unknown yet, I think, how much it'll help when it gets really high, and they've got the gates wide open up at Penyan. But it's a great demonstration project to see if, perhaps there's 2 or 3 locations along the canal that we can do that sort of thing.
What can landowners do because we've always talked about it's not just landowners on the lake, but it's in the watershed along the streams. What kind of plantings and things can they do to, again, try to slow that runoff down and give those things like phosphorus someplace to go other than the lake?
Yeah, so we have a program, Lake Friendly Living, and so if you go to our website, we've got a lot of information there. Obviously, it depends on your particular topography. If you've got a cliff and a slope that's kind of exposed, and what can you do there in order to stabilize that? What sort of plantings might go in there, as opposed to just a more gentle sort of thing. We talk about rain gardens, so not having a lawn all the way up to a stream or a creek or something like that. But being smart in your chemical use. So lawns, trying to minimize fertilizer and pesticides and all those kind of things. So going more natural will help out quite a bit too. Or like when I do, if I'm trying to get rid of some weeds, it's very specific spot treatments or trying to dig them out, that sort of thing. Septic systems are another big concern. So a lot of older places, some don't even have septics, it's just raw runoff. So trying to modernize, update. There's oftentimes, I think Yates ran out, but the state has a program to assist people in updating septic systems where they'll pay 50% up to, I think, $5,000. So there's lots of different programs that people can look at, and our Lake Friendly Living page certainly has a lot of info on that.
Are you getting a generally positive response from the public and from farmers? There's Lake Friendly Living, there's also a Lake Friendly Farming program. Are most people, when you give them this information, getting on board and saying, okay, that makes sense, I can do that?
I think quite a few. I think the ones that come forward and engage us are already positively inclined, so I think that's a good rate. I think our challenge is to reach others who may not have heard about us or thought about it at all, and try to engage them and show them that, you know, keeping the nutrients on their land is helpful for them, because the crops are going to go better. You're going to pay less for fertilizer, and plus your soil isn't eroding away.
A lot of this data, well, in fact, almost all of this data we're talking about is not being gathered by experts, but by citizen scientists. Talk about volunteer opportunities, HAB monitoring, lake level, stream monitoring. There's lots of ways people can get involved and help.
Yeah, so we have quite a few field opportunities. So we monitor 6 streams 3 times. We're down to 3 times. Now we've gotten a big database. Now it's more confirmatory. But we do need more volunteers, anywhere from Kashan, Big Stream, the outlet, Big Stream, Catherine Creek, along to Reeder Creek on the east side. So that one's pretty stable now, but we always need more people. We also have a program called Citizens Statewide Lake Assessment Program, so CSLAP. And that's where people go out on boats, and we have 4 locations in the lake, and that's every 2 weeks for 8 weeks during the summer. And that's where we get the real data on what the status of the lake is from year to year. So we need more people to do that. You don't have to have a boat. Having a boat and captain is nice, but we need other people along for the ride to go do that. And that's actually very involved, because you do a lot of the activities yourself, assessments and experiments. And then, of course, the HABs program is, we have about 125 so far, but we have a number of zones around the lake that we need people for, particularly in the southern part of the lake where it's a little bit more sparsely populated. So if people want to do that, and particularly in those areas, they can volunteer on our website. We do have a new program that's looking at the lake level after last fall. People got very concerned again. We've always been looking at it and had information on it, but now we're doing more in the educational aspect and notifications. So we have a committee that does that, so need volunteers to help work with that. Where we can really use volunteers, it's not as neat and sexy, is in helping manage the organization.
Right.
Because we're growing so large, we have now 1 full-time and a part-time person, and we're trying to grow that. But managing all these programs and educating people and communicating and doing events, we need people to be on committees to help with that. And so if you have computer skills or just want to help out, doesn't really matter. We can use your help in that way too.
SenecaLake.org is the website to find out about these volunteer opportunities and all these citizen science programs. One of the things that happens in Seneca Lake, being so deep, 600 feet at the maximum, you get that annual turning over of the water. Is that a good thing, bad thing, or neutral thing in terms of the overall health of the lake?
I suspect that it's a good thing. It does help bring the oxygen down into the depths of the lake, so that lake trout and everything, it's certainly like that. It's an interesting phenomenon. Certainly the DEC has been doing some really interesting experiments, and last year they had some buoys at various depths that recorded what the currents were. And it just showed you how much the lake sloshes around during the summer once it heats up. Is very impressive, and particularly at Long Point where it necks down, and how the southern part and the northern part are actually, there is some communication, but they're kind of different entities. We note on the fishery, we helped with the trout derby, and we're collecting quite a few lake trout and some other trout, but focused on lake trout. The lake trout were all in the north, and the south was the brown trout and the salmon. Not totally, but it's very distinct difference in which fish were there and what's going on with it.
You mentioned that started because some fishermen were saying they thought there were fewer fish. Do we know yet whether that's fact or just anecdotal?
No, not to necessarily prejudge it, but it appears that the initial results from the lake trout is that they're feeding on different types of fish than they used to, or what you would expect. And one in particular is a surface feeding fish. It does not go deep. And so it's very possible that there's fish, it's just they're not doing the same thing and acting the same way as they have in the past.
Let's talk about membership. That's a big source of financial support, and I know that's been a big push, and membership's been growing. Talk about the ways someone can be a member and support Seneca Lake Pure Waters.
Yeah, well, we confer membership with a donation as small as $25. And we encourage certainly a lot more, and we have quite a few donors that are, 1,000 or 2,000 or more. So that's really important. Again, I mentioned the staff, but we also have, expenses for all the programs. But right now we're in a membership drive. So we do that kind of May through July to try to build it up. So we're approaching 1,000 members, and that's up from just a couple of years ago down more about 500 or so. Last year we tried, we got all the addresses for all the homeowners on the lake, which surprisingly not that many are actually members. So we tried to focus on them, thinking that everyone who lives on a lake at least ought to be a member, as well as others in the watershed. So we did get some response there, but we'll keep working at those things. And I think we'd like, I would think that we would do better if we can get up into the 2,500 range. We do have a lot of contacts out there. We do have a lot of occasional users that are members. So if you map out where our members are, they're all over the country. So we have people that it demonstrates how people come here and the beauty of the area and how wonderful it is and why we need to take care of it.
I know from time to time you've done fundraising events. Anything in the pipeline right now?
Yep. Our annual fundraising dinner is 25th of August. It'll be down in Watkins Glen. So we only can take about 150 for capacity. But that's a big, it's the first one we've done since COVID started. And so people are really excited about that. And so we're out. We're also doing a virtual auction kind of alongside that. So last year that worked out really well and generated a lot of excitement and some funds for us, which is great. But a great chance to highlight some of the local businesses. And that's another thing about membership I should add, is that we did focus on businesses and they've really responded. So that's gone up from 40-ish to about 125 or so businesses that have signed up as members and partners and all that. And hopefully that'll continue to grow.
All right, Bill Roege with the Seneca Lake Pure Waters Association. SenecaLake.org is the website for volunteer opportunities, all this database on andHABs and lake level and stream monitoring. It's a tremendous resource. Thanks for the update as always. Say hello to everybody else in the office. I've talked to a number of you over the years and always appreciate it. Thanks so much.
Thanks so much for having us. We really appreciate your support.
Inside the FLX has been produced today by Nate Sharman. Coming up Friday, we have our usual Chuck Mason, Auburn City Clerk visit. And next Tuesday, we go back to the Tuesday live program. It'll be Chris Lejeski with the Montezuma Audubon Center next Tuesday morning at 9 o'clock. Thanks for watching.